guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I am back with another tier list, and in today's tier list I'm continuing the series where I rank some of the best players of this generation at every position. I already did strikers and wingers. If you have not seen those videos, you can go check them out. They're on my page somewhere. But today, as you can see, we are doing midfielders, and I'm so excited for this list, man. I am so excited because this generation has some of the best midfielders of all time, and I cannot wait to start ranking them. Obviously, we have a plethora of different midfielders here. There's around like 13 players on this tier list, and they're all very different. We have box-to-boxes, we have CDMs, we have advanced 8s. I didn't want to make like one separate video for every single type of midfielder. I just wanted to make like one long video with like every midfielder that I thought was the best of this era, whether they're a CDM or an 8, it doesn't matter, so I just put them all in one list. I hope you guys don't mind. When it comes to the criteria for this, obviously, like I said, all these players have very different roles. They play different positions, they play for different teams. They're just asked to do different things. And for me, like, we're going to talk about their career, we're going to talk about the way that they played. I'm not really going to look at stats that much. Stats are not going to be a determining factor for this video, because to me, and I think if you guys obviously you watch football, you know this, a midfielder's impact is very rarely determined by stats. I mean, there's obviously occasions where, you know, the stat sheet is amazing, but most of the time, a midfielder can impact the game and it not show up on the stat sheet, which a lot of these guys did for a long time in their career. So for me, like I said, stats are not going to be the end-all, be-all for this, because unlike strikers and wingers, these guys are not that, like, most of them are not tasked with scoring goals or even assisting sometimes. So again, like I said, stats will not be like the end-all, be-all. And yeah, man, like if you guys see the tiers on the side, we have 4 tiers. We have GOATs, we have great, we have good, and then WOTB, which means worst of the best. Because obviously, if I'm putting a player there, it does not mean that they're bad. It just means, like, in relation to the other guys here, who are some of the greatest players of all time, they're just not quite on that tier. Some honorable mentions for this video are guys like Santi Cazorla, Xabi Alonso. I'm missing some other guys. Maybe Cesc Fabregas as well. I mean, those Spanish midfielders were all amazing in the 2010s decade. Who else am I missing who's an honorable mention? I'm trying to think. Maybe Bruno Fernandes, if you want to throw him in there. Oh, Okay Gundogan as well. I don't know why I just said Bruno Fernandes, by the way. Okay Gundogan, who's obviously still killing it at Barcelona. They didn't make the cut because this video would be just way too long. But I think the crop that we have here is going to be pretty fun to rank. I hope you guys enjoy this video. Let me know what you think in the comment section. And let's start ranking some midfielders. First up, we have Casemiro, who to me is going to go into GOATs. Now, I want to mention this now because I didn't mention this in the intro. I forgot. But I want to say it now. I feel like a lot of times when I'm making these tier lists, I tend to be very generous with S tier. Like, I tend to put a lot of players in that tier because obviously I'm making a tier list of the best players of this generation. So you could argue all of them deserve to be in S tier. But in this video, I want to be a little bit more stingy, more critical with that tier, because you guys always let me know in the comment section as well, which I appreciate. If I'm putting every single player in S tier, then it devalues that tier. So today we're going to be more critical, more stingy, less generous with that tier. Just want to get that out of the way before we actually get into talking about Casemiro. And now let's talk about Casemiro. Even with all that being said, he deserves to be in the top tier. Casemiro is one of the best players of all time at this position, so he deserves to be in S tier. People argue sometimes he's the best of all time at this position. They're fucking lying. They don't know what they're talking about. He's not, like, to me, he's not close, but he is in that conversation, obviously, for second or third, because obviously I think you guys know who I think is the best of all time at this position, which we're going to get to very briefly in this video. But to talk about Casemiro, man, I mean, this guy, what can I say? The man's won 5 UCLs. And obviously that's a team, I mean, really 4. He didn't start in the final in Lisbon in that game because mostly in that team in 2014, it was mostly Xabi Alonso and Querida who played for Real Madrid in that position, in that role. But he was still part of that team and won that UCL. But really, like, as the main guy, as like a contributing player, 4 UCLs, which is still fucking absurd, bro. I mean, 4 UCLs is crazy. And this guy, again, like I said, in Lisbon, wasn't a starter, but in Milano and Kiev and in Cardiff and in Paris, was a pivotal part to all those teams, was the engine for that team. And Cardiff scored a goal in that final. The second goal of that game, he scored a banger from outside of the box. It took deflection, but still a great goal. And Casemiro, man, was a guy who, he didn't really get to shine like Modric or Cruz or Ronaldo, obviously, or Benzema or Bale. He was mostly like in the background of those teams, but everybody who watched Real Madrid in that time knows those teams don't win anything if it wasn't for Casemiro. They don't get anywhere without that guy because he was that good. And this guy would do the dirty work. He, along with Pepe, Sergio Ramos, and Varane, were kind of like obviously their defensive backbone. And Casemiro was the guy who protected that back line, allowed Modric and Cruz to go more forward because he had it all under control back there. And bro, obviously goes to Man United, and in this first season there was arguably the best CDM in the world along with Rodri. I mean, people forget how good he was last season. This season has been dealing with injuries and kind of got fat. I mean, if you want to say that, he looks like Nate from Ted Lasso. People, like, they show that meme, which is very true, but still, I mean, this season when he's played, in my opinion, he's been not great, but decent still. Not in the beginning of the season, but now more so he's been a little bit better. But last year he was amazing. In that run in 2022, when they went to the final and beat Liverpool in Paris, he was amazing in that team as well. And this guy, bro, like, when it comes to his game, obviously we know amazing defensively. His defensive awareness is fantastic. His work rate is insane. I mean, especially at Real Madrid, he was just everywhere on the pitch. Just like I'm talking about, like, mostly in his own half, but just winning the ball back every single time. His ball winning was insane. And technically, people don't really talk about Casemiro technically. They don't really give him that credit, but technically, he's so good. If you give this guy space, he's picking out a pass from anywhere on the pitch. And he can play those passes from his own half into the final third, like, really well. Like, he's amazing at that. In his prime, he was amazing. Still to this day, he's amazing. If you give this guy space, he's making something happen no matter what, because he is very good technically, and people don't give him enough credit for that. But if you watch Casemiro, I know you know how good this guy truly is on the ball. So yeah, to me, man, obviously he's a rival player. I hated playing against Casemiro because, I'm saying this in an endearing way, by the way, but he was a fucking bastard. I hated playing against him because he was always, like, I mean, we all remember that El Clásico in 2017 where Messi scored the winner. He was all over Messi in that game, fouling him constantly and just being a fucking pest. But he did that really well, man. But to me, yeah, Casemiro, one of the best of all time at his position. This guy was, like I said, just a great player. A great player, so he's going to go into GOATs for me. Moving on to Bastian Schweinsteiger, who to me is going to go into great. I feel like a lot of people don't really give Bastian Schweinsteiger the recognition that he deserves. But this guy was so good and such a backbone for that Bayern Munich team that obviously made multiple UCL finals and won a treble. This guy was so good. He could play so many different positions on the pitch. He could play as an 8. He could play as a CDM. He could really do anything you wanted him to do. Obviously, he won a World Cup with Germany in 2014. In that team, obviously, we all know about Ozil. We know about Thomas Müller. We know about Kroos. But no one ever talked about Bastian Schweinsteiger. But those teams, like I said, similar to Casemiro, they don't win anything without this guy. Such a talented player. I mean, he had a great shot on him. His passing was elite. He could do long passing, short passing. Anything you needed this guy to do, he could do, and he was elite at it. And yeah, man, he was just amazing. He was a great player. Obviously, people mostly remember him because of his stint at Man United, post-leaving Bayern Munich. Don't look at that version of Bastian Schweinsteiger. He was way past his prime. If Man United would have had this guy in 2012, 2011, 2013, they would have won multiple league titles after that because this guy was that good. Obviously, we know what happened in 2012. He missed a penalty against Chelsea in their home stadium to basically win Chelsea that UCL final, because then we know Drogba went on and scored that goal. But I mean, this guy in 2013 in that treble-winning team, he was one of the most important players. Again, didn't really get the shine, similar to Casemiro, like Ribery or Robin or any of those guys, or Lewandowski. Was he there with Lewandowski? Yeah, he was there with Lewandowski for, I think, a season maybe. But any of the attackers I'm talking about mostly. But this guy, if you watched him play, you know how good he was. So for me, Schweinsteiger, like I said, could play as a 6, could play as an 8, could really play anywhere in the midfield and be really productive. So for me, he's going to go into great. Look at him in his prime. Again, like Prem fans, don't look at him at Man United because, again, he was terrible there. It did not work out. But in his prime, insanely good. And even at Man United, he wasn't really that bad, by the way. When I watched him play at Man United, he wasn't really that terrible of a player. Again, past his prime. But to me, Bastian Schweinsteiger is going to go into great. One of the most underrated players of this generation, in my opinion. Next, we have David Silva, who to me is going to go into great. Similar to Bastian Schweinsteiger, one of the most underrated players of all time. I feel like when people talk about underrated players, they always bring up David Silva or Santi Cazorla, who again didn't make this list. But David Silva, man, I mean, this is a guy who's top 10 all time in Premier League assists, was a pivotal part to those Man City teams. I mean, he, along with Agüero and Robinho, I think, I'm pretty sure, and Dzeko, was part of that first crop of players that Man City, that group bought when they first started, like when the takeover first started. And he worked under Pellegrini, he worked under Mancini, he worked under Pep. This guy was a constant on that team every single year, never got dropped. And, you know, and we know how Man City has the ability to buy any player that they want. And this guy was a constant on that team every single year because he was that good. One of the best creative players this game has ever seen. I was debating between putting him and Cesc Fabregas on this list, and I put him because I think he's a little bit better than Cesc Fabregas, in my opinion. I just think David Silva, if you watched him play, I mean, this guy was Euro 08, World Cup 2010, and Euro 2012. He won all those for Spain. He was in all those teams and all those squads. And he was amazing in all those teams. Obviously, a part of that great crop of Spanish midfielders in the 2010s and early and late 2000s, which, like I said, won all those trophies. And David Silva was a stud, man. A stud. In 2018, he was so good. That 2018 season where Man City had a historic year, he was so good. And yeah, man, I feel like people don't really appreciate this guy because he wasn't flashy. He didn't really have the stats. Like, cause we live in such a world, like we live in a world now where everything in football is based on stats, or really sports in general. People don't really take a time to look at the individual player and what he provided for his team. But this guy, I could argue, at his peak, really was a top 5 midfielder in the world, and for sure in the Prem. At his peak, he was one of the best creative players this game has ever seen. I truly believe that with every fiber in my being. Go watch David Silva and the way that he could just, his dribbling, he was just a magician on the ball, bro. And this season, Real Sociedad, they don't have him because he got injured. This team would be 1,000 times better with David Silva because his class continues to, like, it carries on, bro. This guy is literally class personified. That's what it is. That's what he was. That's what he is. Obviously, didn't get to shine like Xavi, Iniesta, and Busquets and some of the older players in Spain. But this guy, again, I'm gonna continue the trend with Casemiro and with Schweinsteiger because I know it sounds corny, but I promise you it's true. Those teams, those Spain teams, those Man City teams, all those teams, they may win without him, but they don't win as much as they did without him. And I believe that. So for me, David Silva, again, an insanely underrated player. Some people might think I'm overrating him a little bit. I don't think I am. I think he belongs in great. He was a great, great player for a number of years, really. I mean, his longevity is amazing. This is a guy who won, who was amazing at Valencia as well, along with David Silva. People forget about him at Valencia. Before he ever got to Man City, I watched him at Valencia. I know how good he was. I remember those teams. And he was just amazing. So yeah, for me, he's gonna go into great. Next up, we have Luka Modri, who to me is obviously gonna go into GOATs. People argue he's the greatest midfielder of all time. Now, he's obviously in that conversation. I don't think he's the best of all time, but he's definitely one of the greatest this game has ever seen. This generation, any generation. There's very few players in the history of this game like Luka Modri. This is the type of guy who comes around once every 50, 70 years. Honestly, he's really that good. This is a guy who won a Ballon d'Or in the Messi Ronaldo era, who brought who brought Croatia back to relevancy, making the World Cup final in 2018. He was amazing in that run. Obviously, one player of the tournament. His game against, his quarterfinal game against Denmark, I'm pretty sure, or against Russia was it? I don't know who it was, but he was just insanely good. Obviously, 2022 World Cup was amazing again, taking Croatia to the semifinal. And for Real Madrid, man, I mean, to me, obviously 2018 he was amazing because he won the Ballon d'Or, made the World Cup final. But honestly, you could argue his best season ever, in my opinion, was 2022. That year where they won the game against Liverpool and obviously Paris. I've mentioned it a couple of times already with Casemiro as well. But Luka Modri in that whole UCL run was insane, bro. Against PSG in that second leg, amazing. Against Man City in the second leg, amazing. Against Chelsea in the second leg, that pass to Rodrigo, that outside of the boot pass, which is, you can literally not place it better if you use your fucking hands, bro. Like, this guy was so good. One of the best box-to-box. He's up there. Like, in terms of box-to-box players, he's amazing. Like, just run up and down the pitch. His work rate is insane. Obviously, we know at Spurs he was good. Not great in my opinion, but obviously got that big money move to Real Madrid. At Real Madrid, his first season there, his first couple seasons there, but really his first season, he wasn't really that great. But then he hit the ground rolling. He hit the ground running. Sorry, like that's what. Not rolling. He hit the ground running. And then, like I said, in 2014, 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2022, this guy, he's so good. He's so good. Luka Modri. I don't have to go into too much stuff about Luka Modri because if you watch the game, and I'm sure most of us watching this video, we've watched the majority of his career. We know how good this guy is. One of the greatest playmakers and one of the greatest passers this game has ever seen, as well as his dribbling is elite. I mean, this guy could carry the ball like from his own half until like the final third and just make a dissecting pass like very few players here. So for me, Luka Modri is going to go into GOATs. Next up, we have Ngolo Kante. People might think this is crazy, but if you know, you know. He's going to go into GOATs. Ngolo Kante is one of the best players this game has ever seen. Next up, we have Ngolo Kante. I said I was going to be stingy with GOATs, but if you know, you know. This is not crazy to me. This is honestly, if you know ball, you know. Ngolo Kante's in GOATs. He's one of the greatest players the Premier League has ever seen, and I truly believe that. The only player in Premier League history to win a Premier League in back-to-back years with two different teams. Leicester City 2016, Chelsea 2017, and he was arguably the best player on both of those teams. Now, obviously, Chelsea 2017, you could argue Eden Hazard, and you'd be very correct in making that argument, and I would hear you out, but N'Golo Kante was right there. And in Leicester City 2016, that team, obviously, with Robert Huth and Wes Morgan and Danny Drinkwater, and, obviously, we know Jamie Vardy and Riyad Mahrez got most of the shine on those teams. N'Golo Kante was the best player on that team. He was better than Jamie Vardy. He was better than Riyad Mahrez. And we know because the next season, he was really the only key piece that left. I mean, I think Danny Drinkwater left as well, but I mean, Vardy was still there and Mahrez was still there. And N'Golo Kante went to Chelsea, and that team didn't compete for the Premier League. Now, obviously, we know that was a fluke, not a fluke season, but it was going to be hard for Leicester City to win the Premier League back-to-back years. But N'Golo Kante leaves, and we see how that team fell off. Also, for France, insanely good. N'Golo Kante's game is one that, obviously, we know, like the famous memes with Kante, he's very shy, he's not very outspoken. But on the pitch, this guy was, I mean, as intimidating of a presence I've ever seen in my life. As a person, he's not intimidating whatsoever, but as a player, he's one of the most intimidating players I've ever seen. I mean, this is a guy who was on your ass all the time. Pause. Does that sound weird? I'm sorry. But he was always constantly riding players. I promise you I'm not doing this shit on purpose. He was always trailing players. He was always looking for the ball. Even if you got past him, he was right there running behind you, trying to get that ball back. Just running from box to box every single time. He could play as a box to box. He could play as a six. Mostly as a box to box. So I don't really think Kante was a CDM, like people call him. He was mostly a box to box in my opinion because his work rate was insane. He could be at two places at the same time. And this is a guy, I mean, his UCL run in 2021 is one of the best that I've ever seen. His UCL run when Chelsea won that game against Man City, that final in Portugal, in Lisbon, That whole run against Real Madrid, against Atletico Madrid, those games that he played were insane. And in the final, he was amazing. That Chelsea team was defensively, they didn't concede a single goal in that final, obviously, to Man City, a Man City team that scored a bunch of goals. And a lot had to do with the fact that, N'Golo Kante, who was the pivot, like the key piece to me, and obviously, we know guys like Azpilicueta and obviously Rudiger and Christensen. But to me, N'Golo Kante was the key piece of that team. Obviously, in the World Cup in 2018 was amazing. Won a World Cup. This guy won a World Cup. He's one of the few players that in the history of this game that have won a World Cup. Not few, but one of the he's in that room with World Cup winners. And yeah, to me, N'Golo Kante, bro, his shot, he had a good shot on him when he needed to shoot. I mean, I remember a couple of bangers that he scored. But yeah, just his work rate and his passing ability, and just really he was so relentless on the pitch that watching him was just a joy. I mean, this guy, like I said, you get past him, you sprint by him, it does not matter. He's right on your ass. His speed was insane. His agility was crazy. So for me, N'Golo Kante is going to go into GOATs. One of the best players the Premier League has ever seen. I mean, I don't think that's crazy to put him in that tier. Moving on to Sergio Busquets. Need I say more? GOAT. The greatest player of all time at his position. He's the greatest CDM of all time. To me, there's no debate about it. There's never been a player as elegant and as unfazed as Sergio Busquets. That's really the best way I can put it. I've seen many players at Barcelona. I've been a fan of that team for 15 years. I've seen great players. I've seen Messi, I've seen Iniesta, I've seen Piqué, I've seen Puyol, I've seen David Villa, I've seen Ronaldinho, I've seen Eto'o. I mean, you name it. I've seen Neymar, Suarez. I've seen all these players. I don't think any player, apart from Messi, gave me the sensation watching him play that Sergio Busquets did, and they played totally different positions. Messi was a goal scorer, just a magician on the ball. Sergio Busquets was a magician on the ball, but in his own way. Obviously, he was not going to take players on one-on-one and dribble past the whole team, but this guy, he was so impossible to press. It's really amazing. I mean, we all see these, people, here's the thing with Busquets. FIFA culture has intoxicated people's brains, because Sergio Busquets famously never got an informed card in FIFA. But if you watched him play, you know this guy is, I mean, really words can't describe how good he is. I'm really running out of words to say because I don't know how to describe Sergio Busquets. I don't know how to describe his game. I mean, he was just unfazed all the time. He would play as he would receive the ball in between, he would receive the ball, he would drop deep right, between the two center backs, he would receive the ball, players would come and press him, he would just turn away from them, he'd find the outlet pass. He was so calm. I've never seen a player more calm on the ball than him. Everything on that Barca team unlocked because of Sergio Busquets. He would beat that, the lineup, the press would come in, he would beat it right away, and then everything would open up. And then we'd spray the ball around to Xavi or Iniesta or whoever it was, or Messi, and they'd do their thing. But everything started with Sergio Busquets, because we all know Barcelona, and especially under Pep, we play out from the back. You play out from the back no matter what. I don't care if every player is covered and marked by a man, you play out from the back. And Sergio Busquets was the first option from all those passes. Usually when Valdés, Piqué, or Puyol, maybe sometimes, but sometimes it's just, the ball just went directly to Busquets, right from goal kick. And this guy was, I mean, you guys know. You guys know how good this guy is. If you've seen his edits on TikTok, people make edits of Busquets. I mean, it's just insane how good this guy was, in my opinion. Insane. He could also carry the ball forward. His passing ability, long, was insane. I mean, this guy could just pick out a pass from anywhere on the pitch. So, yeah, to me, again, like I said, defensively was great as well. People forget how good this guy was defensively. Just a great tackler. Was so long, so lanky. He could just get his foot on anything. Just deflect passes, get on those passing lanes, and just intercept balls all the time. So yeah, to me, Sergio Busquets, a GOAT. The greatest of all time at his position. To me, there's no debate about it. We've never seen a player like him, and we'll never see a player at his position like him. I really believe that. Next up, we have Mesut Ozil. Bro, Mesut Ozil. What do I do with Mesut Ozil? I'm going to put him in great. I feel like, actually, no. No, great. I feel like if David Silva's in great, so does Mesut Ozil deserves to be in great as well. Obviously, peak for peak, Mesut Ozil has one of the greatest peaks of all time. I really believe that. If it was based on peak only, he'd be in GOATs. But I got to take the whole career into account. And to me, obviously, I feel like David Silva and Schweinsteiger, their peak were different. And obviously, Schweinsteiger and him played totally different positions. And maybe even David Silva as well, but not really. They were both creative players. But Schweinsteiger for sure. But peak for peak, he has one of the greatest peaks I've ever seen. Mesut Ozil from 2010 to 2013... I mean, bro, you hold your hands up in the air and you say, how the fuck can a player be this good? And with that Jose Mourinho counterattack of him and having Ronaldo on the left and having whoever on the right, whether it was Benzema or Higuain or any player or Kaká, this guy was just a magician on the ball. Some of the most beautiful passes I've ever seen in my entire life were courtesy of Mesut Ozil, who was just a stud, man. A stud, dribbling as well. I mean, this guy, what he could do, but when you think of Mesut Ozil, you think of passing and how good of a passer he was and how elegant of a passer he was, and just not really just a passer, but a playmaker overall. I mean, this guy could see a play develop before anybody else on the pitch. He could pick up the ball and just see things happen that you're like, how the fuck did he see that? But that's just the genius of Mesut Ozil. But to me, Mesut Ozil was a guy who faded, his career faded away in not such a great way. I mean, it doesn't do him justice for the player that he was, the way that his career ended. It makes me sad, bro, because this guy at Arsenal had a couple good seasons. Someone made this point in a TikTok video recently, and I want to give him credit for that because this is not my point, by the way, but they brought this up and I actually thought, wow, that's actually a really good point. Mesut Ozil very rarely popped up against big teams in the Premier League. Like against big six teams, he wasn't really that effective every time. And when he said that, I was like, you know what, he's crazy. But then I thought about it, and I was like, you know what, he's kind of right. Mesut Ozil was a guy who at Arsenal, you know, he had Giroud, he had Alexis Sanchez, he had great seasons with those two guys, by the way. Like, they were a deadly attack. But again, like, I just think like he could have been so much more, bro. He should be in the argument with Iniesta and Modric and all these guys as some of the best to ever play this game, and he's unfortunately not in that conversation. People obviously look at some people say he's the greatest midfielder of all time based on peak. Not true. There's Modric is a better peak than him, and I think Iniesta and some of the other guys here have a better peak than Mesut Ozil. But his peak is for sure one of the best of all time. And when it comes to passing, no one did it quite as well as Mesut Ozil. But again, I don't think his longevity is there. Just the way his career ended just leaves a bitter taste in my mouth. Obviously, we know what happened with Arsenal. They sold him out completely. What he was standing up for people suffering, and they completely decided to shut him the fuck up, which, you know, that's Arsenal for you, I guess. Like Stan Kroenke and whatever the fuck he has going on. We know those clubs don't really care about anything else other than their pockets, so they fucking kicked him out the club for that, which really pisses me off. But still, man, even before that, he wasn't really playing that great. But yeah, to me, Mesut Ozil is going to go into great. Again, if it was based on peak, he'd being GOAT, but based on the totality of a career, I can't put him in that tier. Moving on to Andres Iniesta, I gotta put him in GOAT. Like obviously Iniesta's gonna go to GOAT, but there's so many players in the GOAT category already. I'm already fucking this up. But anyway, let me be. It's not even about the tier ranking. It's about the conversation that goes into each player. Andres Iniesta, in my humble opinion, is the greatest midfielder that I've ever seen. Now, it's close between him and the second guy, and we're going to talk about the second guy very shortly here. I'm sure you guys can decipher who it is by the pictures that are left here. But to me, Andres Iniesta was a magician, bro. A magician on the ball, part of that great crop of La Masia players, like Busquets, like Xavi, like Messi, who just transformed Barcelona. One of the best big game players this game has ever seen. Against Chelsea in 2009, scoring that game winner at Stamford Bridge, that beautiful goal that almost won the Puskás. Against the Netherlands in 2010, scoring that goal to bring Spain their first World Cup in their history. In the UCL final against Juventus in 2015, dropping a 10 out of 10 performance in that game, or 9 out of 10, just being dominant, the best player on the pitch, in my opinion, on that day. He was just amazing. In 2011 in Wembley Stadium, just a masterclass. He was too good, bro. Andres Iniesta was too good. When it comes to passing and dribbling, we always talk about, obviously, Messi and how good of a dribbler he was. If you watch Iniesta's dribbling highlights, they honestly will leave you as speechless. Maybe not as, but quite nearly like the same level of speechless or like jaw-dropping as Messi. We all remember that beautiful assist that he had when Barcelona played PSG in the 2015 UCL round of quarterfinals. Was it round of 16 or quarterfinals? It was round of 16, sorry, against PSG in the round of 16, where he picks up the ball from his own halfway line, takes on the entire PSG team, and then plays that ball in behind to Neymar, a perfect pass, and Neymar ends up converting that goal. Iniesta's career kind of faded, not the best way at the end, especially me as a Barca fan. It kind of hurt the way. Like, obviously, he ended up going to Vissel Kobe, and his last few years at Barcelona weren't really great. I mean, he was still good, was a starter on that team, but wasn't Iniesta that we knew. He was just kind of past it. I mean, he was just a step too slow. Even, like, Iniesta was already kind of slow, but it got even slower later on in his career. And just wasn't that same player because his body just couldn't hold up. But when it comes to peak, to me, he has the greatest peak any midfielder has ever had. I truly believe that with everything, with every fiber of my being. What the fuck am I saying? I believe Iniesta is that good. And yeah, man, I mean, his passing, his dribbling, his creativeness, I mean, there's really not much to say. This guy would have won multiple Ballon d'Ors if Messi and Ronaldo didn't exist. You could argue you should have won it in 2010. I disagree, but people make that argument. They're very correct in making that argument because he was that good. But yeah, to me, Andres Iniesta is going to go into GOATs. No debate about it. To me, like I said, the best I've ever seen at his position. Next up, we have KDB, who to me, again, I'm sorry, I'm fucking, like, he's going to go into GOAT, bro. He's going to go into GOAT. We already have how many players? 6 players in GOAT. But, I mean, I got to put him in there, bro. I can't disrespect KDB like that. One of the greatest midfielders in the Premier League history, or arguably the greatest. People make that argument already. And this is a guy who was just, he's so good. He's still to this day the best player in the world. One of the best players in the world, in my opinion. Top 3, top 4 at worst. Kevin De Bruyne is that good of a player. One of the best final third specialists, or arguably the greatest final third player this game has ever seen. When it comes to making that final pass in the box in the final third, no one has done it quite as well as Kevin De Bruyne. His signature pass, picking it up on that right-hand side, crossing the ball to the far post. I mean, we've seen Man City score countless goals because of Kevin De Bruyne doing that. At Wolfsburg, he was amazing. And he's just been amazing for his whole tenure at Man City. Obviously, recently got the monkey off his back, won the treble, won the Champions League finally after all those years of suffering. And this is a guy who, like, you know, when it comes to Premier League players, very few are in his class. And when it comes to footballers in general, very few are in his class. Obviously, you could argue he underachieved with the national team. I think, like I've said this before in videos, but I think that whole Belgium generation with Roberto Martinez underachieved. Lukaku, Hazard, Axel Witsel, Fellaini, all those players kind of underachieved in a way because they were so talented but didn't really win anything. But Kevin De Bruyne on those teams was not really the problem in my opinion. Now, he hasn't turned up the same way he turns up for Man City, but he's still an amazing player. And, you know, with Erling Haaland last year, was just dominant, feeding balls to that fucking giant in the box and just heading them in and just, like, helping him score all those tap-ins and all those great goals. And Kevin De Bruyne, man, he's one of one. When it comes to creative players and just final third specialist, because he's not really a box-to-box. He doesn't really track back that much. But when you give him the ball, like, past midfield, he's going to make something happen. He's going to carry that ball forward. A great dribbler as well. Has a great shot. I forgot to mention, a great shot. I mean, this guy could ping it from outside of the box, score some beautiful goals. I mean, we've seen the goals that he scored. The goal against Real Madrid last year in the Bernabeu comes to mind in that semifinal in the first leg. I mean, just a stud of a player. One of one. So yeah, to me, he's going to go to GOAT. No debate about it. Arguably the best player the Premier League has ever seen. I got to speed this video up because I'm going to take way too long because we have a lot of players left here, but let's keep it going. Toni Kroos to me is going to go into GOATs. I mean, he's got to go into that tier. This guy's amazing. Amazing player. Obviously, underrated in my opinion still. This is a guy who was amazing at Bayern Munich, won a treble with them, goes on to Real Madrid. And, you know, over the past few years, he's even like at his advanced age, he's been one of the best midfielders in the world every single year. And this season, having a spectacular season, he's so good. For Germany, was amazing as well. But yeah, man, Toni Kroos to me is one of the GOATs. A guy who, again, like Modric, like Casemiro, that part of that KCM trio, who are arguably, not to me, but to some people, the greatest midfield trio in the history of football. Again, in Cardiff, Kiev, and Paris, and obviously Milan was a part of all those teams. Was a great part of all those teams. Also has a great shot on him as well. His passing, like all these guys, is amazing. But yeah, to me, Toni Kroos is going to go into GOAT. No debate about it. Moving on to Andrea Pirlo, again, he's going to go into GOATs. I mean, I can't put him any lower than that, bro. I can't. I want to put some of these guys over, but really look at this GOATs tier. Who do I move down? Who can I really move down and not feel like I'm disrespecting them? I mean, Andrea Pirlo, he created that deep lying playmaker. I mean, this guy would sit deep, like, in his own half and just play some of the most beautiful long passes the game has ever seen. Also a guy who won a World Cup in 06 and was a pivotal part of that team. Won 2 UCLs with Milan in 03 and in 07. Made another final in 05 and obviously lost to Liverpool in that historic game in Istanbul. Goes to Juventus, makes another UCL final. Was amazing for that team along with Pirlo and Vidal, who actually forgot to put on the list as well. Arturo Vidal, he's an honorable mention in my opinion as well. I forgot to mention him, but he should be in here. But yeah, I mean, Pirlo, I mean, we know how good this guy is. The master. Deep lying playmaker. I mean, he wasn't really a CDM, but just like a guy who would pick up that ball and, you know, he would get those outlet passes from the center backs and he would feed it to Seedorf, he would feed it to Shevchenko, he would feed it to Crespo, he'd feed it to Tevez, he'd feed it to Morata. Whichever player was in front of him, he'd find a way to get in that ball. He could play long. At Milan, he didn't play, like when he really moved to Juve in 2011, that's when he really started to like improve on his long passing game or really showcase him more, because at Milan he wasn't really tasked to do that as much. But at Juventus, I mean, this guy also played for Inter as well. Played for all big three Serie A teams. But yeah, man, Andrea Pirlo, master of the game. I mean, if you watch this guy play, you know how good he is. I'm not exaggerating. One of the best of all time. Period. Next up, we got Frank Lampard. Oh man, this is bad. I'm not even using the last 2 tiers. Frank Lampard's gonna go into GOATs, man. I mean, what can you really say? This guy has he's top 5 or top 7 in goals in Premier League history as a midfielder, and also top 10 in assists, I'm pretty sure. I mean, his output for the position that he played, because he wasn't really a guy who was in the box all the time, but he did score a lot of goals because he was kind of like one of the main attacking threats on that Chelsea team. But what he did was amazing, bro. Frank Lampard was a stud. Obviously won a UCL in 2012. Underachieved with England in 2010, and not 2010 specifically, but he actually scored the goal against Germany in 2010 in the round of 16 that actually got disallowed wrongfully. So I don't know. I don't understand how still they disallowed that goal. But anyway, that's besides the point. This is a guy who was obviously he's Chelsea's greatest ever player in my opinion, along with Drogba. You could throw him in there, or maybe Chelsea fans would say Zola or whatever they want to say. But I mean, to me, he's no debate about it. Chelsea's best ever player. This is a guy who kind of helped put them on the map when it comes to like winning those big titles, and he was a part of all those teams in 04 with Mourinho or with Ancelotti or with, you know, you name the manager, he was there obviously, or with Di Matteo. So to me, yeah, Frank Lampard's going to go into GOATs. You could argue he's the greatest midfielder in Premier League history. Now I would disagree. I think there's a guy here who I think is a little bit better. But yeah, to me, he's going to go into GOATs. I mean, if you want, like, Frank Lampard is a stud. Next up, we got Paul Pogba. He's going to go into worst of the best. Worst of the best because Paul Pogba had really 3 or 4 good seasons in his career. Now you could make the same argument for Mesut Ozil, which honestly, am I being hypocritical there, putting Mesut Ozil in great and Drogba in worst of the best? Here's the thing with Drogba, man. He was one of my favorite players to watch. I love Paul Pogba. I love Paul Pogba. I don't want you guys, like, I really enjoyed watching this guy play so much. He was such a gem, such a generational talent, so physical, so, like, I mean, he was, I don't know. I've never seen a player like Paul Pogba, so physical and so gifted at everything, basically. What couldn't this guy do? What couldn't Paul Pogba do? He was like a reincarnation of Ruud Gullit, basically. Everything you wanted this guy to do, he could play as a box-to-box, he could play as an 8 if you wanted him to, he could play as a CDM. It did not matter, he could play anywhere in the midfield. You could put Paul Pogba at striker in his prime, and he would have done the job. Because he was such a force of nature. But Paul Pogba, I mean, his 2015 season is one of the best that I've ever seen. Along with Pirlo and Vidal, and, you know, he was just amazing, bro. And the goals that he scored. But then he goes to Man United, and then it just fell apart. Injuries and just not being consistent enough, and it ruined his career. Now, in my opinion, that wasn't really Paul Pogba's fault. He got too much shit at Man United, in my opinion. People just being dicks, and Man United fans specifically always blaming everything on Paul Pogba. That Man United is a dumpster fire, man. Man United fans, I'm sorry, I know you guys don't want to hear this, but every player that goes to that club recently that's promising just ends up being a bust. And Paul Pogba, if we would have said at Juventus, there's no debate in my mind. There's no question in my mind. We'd be talking about him right now as the best midfielder, one of the best midfielders of this generation. I really believe that because he was that good. He was a no-miss. And we saw when he went to France in 2018. This is a guy who scored in a World Cup final. How many players can say that? Paul Pogba has scored in a World Cup final and scored a banger in a World Cup final, by the way. His shooting is insane, whether it's like power or just like he could place the ball like no other. Just, man, it hurts to see. But worst of the best to me because, again, if we're doing peak, like one season peak, he'd be in GOATs. But again, I can't just look at one season. And he was good before that as well, by the way. Paul Pogba's prime lasted like 3 or 4 years. Again, similar to Ozil, which I'm kind of debating moving Ozil down. But again, I don't know, man. I don't know. Yeah, you know what? Ozil's going to move down. Worst of the best. Because Ozil could have been better. He underachieved. I think both of these guys underachieved in their career. So they're going to go into worst of the best. That might be controversial, but let me know in the comment section what you think. But I think that to me is pretty fair. If I'm going to put Pogba in worst of the best because his peak wasn't that long, I gotta put Ozil in that tier as well because both these guys have a really short peak and then the rest of their career kind of faded pretty in just not in a good way. So for me, they're both gonna go in worst of the best. Moving on to Steven Gerrard, Stevie G, he's to me gonna go into GOATs. Steven Gerrard to me is the greatest midfielder in Premier League history. I believe that. Now he never won a Premier League, but if you watch those Liverpool teams, it was not really Steven Gerrard's fault. Now he did slip, and Demba Ba scored that goal in 2013 when they could have easily won the league. But, I mean, this guy really carried Liverpool for a lot of years. In Istanbul in 2005, they don't win that final if it wasn't for him. Obviously scored a goal in that game. It was great in extra time as well. And just those Liverpool teams, Liverpool never really surrounded him with good enough talent, in my opinion, to win a Premier League. And when they did, they were running up against Man United and Sir Alex Ferguson, who were just stacked with talent and great players and just were the dominant team of that era. But Steven Gerrard, man, his stats aren't as good as Frank Lampard's, but to me, he was a better player. Now, they played more different positions. Steven Gerrard kind of played deeper than Frank Lampard. But, I mean, he was just amazing, man. I mean, there's really not much to say. I mean, this guy won. I mean, this guy, like, go look at the team that Steven Gerrard won the UCL with in 2005. Go look at that team. How many players can carry that team to a UCL final? And now, he wasn't the only, like, he wasn't like he didn't, like, how do I say this? He wasn't the only reason why they won, but he was for sure the main reason, in my opinion. I mean, him along with Jamie Carragher and Xabi Alonso were the best players on that team. But then after that, I mean, who really was on that team? So for me, Steven Gerrard's going to go into GOATs. Again, one of the best players in Premier League history. And to me, until now, he's the best player of all time, like the best midfielder of all time in the Premier League. But again, some other guys could surpass him here, like obviously KDB. But to me right now, he's number one. Next up, we got Thomas Muller, who to me is going to go into great. Thomas Muller is a great player, a fantastic player. But the thing with Thomas Muller is I don't think he's a midfielder. I don't know where to put him. I couldn't put him in the strikers one. He's not a winger. He's just kind of like, I don't know if he's like a true midfielder in a way. He kind of plays like a little bit more advanced than an advanced 8, but a little bit lower than a striker. He's just, what do they call him in Germany? I think they call him an interpreter of space. Interpreter of space. He just finds the space and just makes something happen. But this is a guy who was, actually, am I being disrespectful to Thomas? Yeah, he's going to go into GOATs for me, actually. Yeah, fuck that. He's going to go into GOATs. Thomas Muller is he has the third or the fourth most assists in football history. In the history of football, I think he has over 300 assists. And he's also one of the World Cup top goal scorers of all time. Has been a pivotal part, the key, one of the driving forces to Bayern Munich and 2 treble-winning teams and a World Cup winning team as well with Germany. I mean, this guy is amazing. Since he's been like 30 for like 15 years now. It feels like I saw this guy burst onto the scene in the 2010 World Cup against Argentina when they beat him 4-0, and he's still somehow playing. And he's still this guy's the Barca killer, by the way. He always kills our team. But yeah, to me, he's going to go into GOATs. Next up, we have Xavi, who to me is going to go into GOATs as well. To me, the best midfielder this game has ever seen. I mean, when you look at Xavi and his career, it's just insane what this guy's been able to do. What he did. Obviously, you guys know as a manager, I'm not too fond of him. I think he's a pretty terrible manager, but as a player, again, to me, him and Iniesta are like this, best midfielders of all time. You could say I'm biased, but if you actually watch this guy play, you would know I'm not being biased. I'm being realistic. And Xavi Hernandez wasn't really like as advanced as Iniesta on those teams. He was mostly like the outlet that Busquets found, just kind of a little bit more advanced than Busquets, but a little bit more like a little bit further behind than Iniesta. But he could recycle possession. He could advance the ball forward. He could play it into the final third. He could play long passes. He could shoot the ball. He could shoot free kicks. He could do anything you need him to. And that's he's the most intelligent player this game has ever seen, in my opinion. No one understood the game better than Xavi. And that's why, to me, it's so weird that he's such a terrible manager, because as a player, no one was smarter than this guy, more intelligent than this guy, and understood the game in a better way than this guy. But yeah, to me, he's going to go into GOATs. And then finally, Wayne Rooney, similar to Thomas Muller. I don't know if Wayne Rooney was a midfielder. I just didn't put him in the strikers one or the wingers one, so I don't want to leave him out of this tier list in general, like of the series. But to me, he's going to go into GOATs. I'm going to move David Silva, or actually, I'm going to move Bastian Schweinsteiger down to good, because I need to have someone in that tier. I didn't expect not to have anybody in that tier. But to me, again, talking about Wayne Rooney, I mean, this guy, amazing. Again, I don't know if he was a midfielder per se. I don't really know what Wayne Rooney's position was. He played a lot of different positions, but obviously he can play as an advanced 8 a lot of times. And yeah, man, this guy's arguably, to me, the greatest English player of all time. A guy who won everything there is to win at the club level. Didn't really, again, similar to Frank Lampard and Steven Gerrard, underachieved in the national team level. But we know how good Wayne Rooney is, man. This guy was amazing. Obviously, with Sir Alex Ferguson, he was obviously like the driving force of that dynasty, if you want to call it, that dominant run where they won multiple Premier Leagues, won a UCL, made 3 UCL finals, scored in a UCL final. Wayne Rooney did. But yeah, to me, the greatest English player of all time and one of the best that I've ever seen. And that, guys, is the end of the video. I don't know how long this video is. I think it's over 30 minutes long, so I'm sorry if that was too long for you guys. Some of you guys tell me that you like long videos. Some of you guys tell me that you don't like long videos. If you guys watch until the end and you're a real one, I appreciate you. I love you guys, man. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate all the support on the channel. And yeah, I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace out.